And are we degenerate in a profoundly threatening manner?
Honestly, when all my friends showed up wearing the shirts, I thought you would have noticed by now.
Loadout not available. What? Couldn't connect to the item server?
I think the answer to that may well be yes.
Love it when they're blue. Just give me like 5 more minutes, man, come on!
Overwatch 2 character models have been freed from their encrypted coding, which means that certain people can start making certain videos that you would mainly want to access through certain websites using incognito mode.
The idea that we are ensconced in a culture war has become a rhetorical commonplace.
Oh fuck, okay. Oh, I didn't know I had that mod on!
Dad, all I'm saying is I'm a brony, my friends are bronies, and I actually make animations and art for the brony community.
And that's why you always underscore your fucking computer whenever I walk in. That's why you always turned off your monitor.
How serious is that war?
I'd love for my Sona to be looking at his fat, sweaty ass while rubbing his belly from behind, and then just having him gas all over my Sona's face. That'd be so nice. Or if mine was just underneath him, getting railed underneath his huge belly, and your Sona could be gassing non-stop as he fucks mine like... Huh?
So we're gonna go quite far back if we're gonna get to the beginning of this. Around 4th century Greece, in a place called Crete, more specifically Kos, the city that's on the island of Crete, they are beginning construction on a temple to worship the god of love, which is Aphrodite. As most people can't sort of magic a worship area out of nowhere, they commission a sculptor called Praxiteles. He creates 2 sculptures for them. One of them, Aphrodite, is naked, and the other one she's clothed. The one that stirs up quite a bit of controversy, and as you could probably understand why we're talking about, is the one of her naked. It was seen as very sensual. It was a little bit weird for someone to depict a god. I mean, don't get me wrong, they were doing semi-nude sculptures, but this was one of, if not the first, depictions of a god fully naked. It was too shocking, and so the city brought the clothed one, and I think the naked one went to this place called Knidos. I can't find a real pronunciation from it on the internet, but that's sort of how the story goes. Now, even though most of the original statues are destroyed, and what you can see now are just replicas, this was still groundbreaking in the history of R34. Aphrodite is not a real person. She's made up from the Greek pantheon. Whole religion that used to exist, they used to live on Mount Olympus. It's pretty much dead now, but it's pretty ingrained in Greek culture. Although there's obviously some differences in between making Tracer getting by Widowmaker with a and the statue of Aphrodite. It's a pretty good starting point. Now, moving on from this, but following with religious themes, we get to Dante's Inferno, or more commonly known as the Divine Comedy. So Dante is a 14th century Florentine poet, and his 3 main poems are the Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatorio, or more commonly known as Hell, Heaven, and Purgatory. The reason why these poems were so groundbreaking is because it developed the current Christian ideals of the afterlife. To tell you how sort of groundbreaking this is, if you go and read the Bible, there's not really anything said about hell or heaven. It's just sort of a place with God and a place without God, which arguably, in my opinion, a place without God that I cannot even conceptualize, that is way scarier than the 7 layers with like a dog biting my head off. So all this hellfire and the levels of hell and the 7 deadly sins, they all sort of come from the Divine Comedy. Now this is crucial to understanding how we sort of view online culture and fandoms. This sort of adding on external material or fan fiction, as it's more commonly known, is a really prevalent thing. Even though that these texts are old, we don't call them fan fiction, but they are fan fiction. Another very insightful piece of fan fiction is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Again, another Christian fan fiction. So do I need to keep calling these fan fiction? Again, another Christian fan fiction where it tells the whole story of Satan losing the battle against God. Him and like Beelzebub and all of his other demon friends, they get cast down into hell, where they sort of plot their revenge, build their castle. Then they go into the Garden of Eden, where they, transform into snakes, or at least Satan does. And he goes in and he tricks Eve into eating the apple. The story we've all heard. That whole story, the understanding and the cultural impact of this story was very much backed and developed on by John Milton. These are not works of scripture. This is not intended by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These words are not in the New Testament or the Old Testament. They are external fan fiction, which has been adopted into the popular consensus of the fandom of Christianity. I can call them that, right? That's not offensive. I don't want to do too much comparison now, because I want to sort of save it for the analysis bit, why this all happens. But a really good comparison, if you're struggling to understand how these things have sort of intertwined and become one and synonymous with the works, is Undertale. If you look at sort of how Undertale developed with all of its like subgenres, all of its alternate universes that got developed into their own fandoms. Overtale, I think one of them was. The ones where everyone's like evil, or the ones where everyone's good, or the ones where their genders are swapped around. That is kind of exactly the same as what Dante and John Milton have done with Christianity. Straying from religious works, we have Sherlock Holmes, which still holds quite a popular fandom today with the whole BBC adaptations that have been made recently. The original works of Sherlock Holmes have been credited as the first evidence of fandom or fan culture. When Sherlock Holmes was first being made, it sort of spawned off a whole new group of consumers. Following the Industrial Revolution, these things could be printed like crazy. You didn't have 600 monks writing with their quill to sort of reproduce a book. The printing press was revolutionary for Rule 34 and fandoms as a whole. The fandom that Sherlock Holmes built was the first of its kind. This was the first time that sort of non-religious and fictional characters became just a household name, other than possibly Charles Dickens. But even then, his characters in his works didn't get sort of the rallying behind that Sherlock Holmes has managed to produce. Now, this isn't confusing the modern Sherlock Holmes with Benedict Cumberbatch. This is talking about the original one. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle killed Sherlock Holmes off, he received non-stop letters from fans just being like, please bring him back. I don't want Sherlock Holmes to be dead. Just because of how much they connected with this character. The rallying behind Sherlock Holmes' death showed that there can be community spawning from media. These weren't separate things. There wasn't, oh, we all like the Bible because we're all Christian. It was, we are all Sherlock Holmes fans because we like Sherlock Holmes. Now, you can argue that all these changes and this rallying was because humans are just social animals. It's how we're conditioned. We lived as hunter-gatherers for how many years, then we lived in mud huts together. We sort of have a want to be part of a community. And you can also argue that a decline in religiosity sort of made people want to reach out and gather behind a new way of thinking and new ideas, new stories. But let me propose you this. Solipsism. Enter French philosopher René Descartes. Descartes' main and most prominent quote is, I think, therefore I am. But what does that actually mean? What Descartes is arguing is we can only prove that we exist. We can't prove anything else exists because for other things around us to exist, we must sense that they exist, which is registered in our brain, which means that it could just be our brain making things up. our brains could be in a vat. Just running on a vat with a simulation hooked up, and we would have no idea. Although reality may not be as it seems, how do we know that we are real? Here's what Descartes argues. For things to be real, they must be able to have a conscious thought. This doesn't include things like objects. He has this whole shit with objects and subjects, and we're not going to get onto that today. But for a subject to be real, it needs to be able to think. And how do I prove that I can think? By doubting that I think. I am thinking to doubt. If that makes any sense whatsoever. I might chuck a diagram up here because I'm having such a hard time explaining this. Doubting thought is thinking. Therefore, you can prove that you exist, as there is no way that you can question your own existence without thinking. However, we cannot prove that other people exist. There is a very clear separation between us and the person living next to me. You know, I can't prove that they are thinking. You know, I can see them moving, I can see them talking, but I don't know if they've been able to question and prove that they exist. Sartre talks about this also with his split of consciousness, you know, internal and external consciousness, but we're not really going to talk about him today. Now, these aren't new ideas. This whole idea that, you know, I'm the only person that exists and no one will ever get me, was come up with a bunch of really old wise guys, not philosophers, just wise guys, called the sophists. As already mentioned, solipsism is the idea that you can only prove that you exist, therefore, you know, there's no real point in trying to make this connection that other people can exist. There's no immediate link, there's no necessary link between what's going on in my brain and what's going outside in the outside world, which means that my experience of the outside world is private to me within my brain. People can't understand on a very fundamental level how I experience and perceive the world. Far into the future from Descartes, there's a little thing called the internet that fucking blows up with popularity. For the first time in human history, you can message anyone from around the world at any time and get a response within like 2 minutes, unless they got do not disturb on their Discord status. The message boards, the emails, just the connection of people is revolutionary to our understanding of human sociology and how we connect and interact with other people. However, this idea of solipsism is still existing. Though even more connection is being made through the internet, it's still making an extremely large amount of isolation for people. We can prove that we exist, but, you know, the person on the other side of the screen still doesn't exist. So, what do people do? What is the key way that we can connect with others? And I'll tell you exactly how they did it. Throughout history, with religion, with stories, it's through shared interest. Though you cannot understand how I live my life and how I see the world, and vice versa, I can't do the same for you, we can both mutually understand how much we like a certain thing, TV show, book, whatever it may be. Instead of painstakingly explaining my autism to people, I can just be like, hey, you ever seen Community? I'm like Abed. He's literally like me. Ryan Gosling, Blade Runner. He's literally me. Having these shared interests have rapidly increased the amount that we can understand other people. And the internet has been great for facilitating this. As I said before, these message boards, online communities, you know, Discord servers, just dedicated to a single franchise can help us connect so much more than we could previously. You know, if your interest was niche, or you sort of lived rurally where there just weren't a lot of people, you can now go on and have that mutual understanding with other people, which we crave as humans. We need to be understood as humans. Why do you think we have philosophy, or sociology, or psychology? We need to understand, and that is the main driving force of why we want to connect with others. To put it in a simpler way, the vats that contain our brains are connecting into a big swimming pool. But now you may be questioning, okay, sure, we just have shared interests. That's it, right? How does this tie into Rule 34? Sex and relationships are not foreign to the internet. If I log onto Hypixel, I'm sure I could see people with matching skins and really cringe e-data names. Even on a more modern level or a more socially acceptable level, you still have online apps, sort of like Tinder or Bumble, where people can just meet on the internet and date. And that, like, the main, well, I mean, apart from, you know, Tinder's basically used to people. But the intention is to date other people, you know, one of the most crucial ways of connecting. And if you look at these apps, a lot of them just have, here are my interests. You know, you can type in your interests. I think there's one which is sort of aimed at children called Yubo. But basically, there's like a section where you have all like TV shows, music, and that's what people get judged on. That's how you sort of seek out who you want to talk to. So it's not foreign to the internet. You know, these things are very interlinked. Much like porn. Pornography, although it's been around from the 1800s, has not seen such a rapid increase since like the 1970s. Online pornography is one of the biggest forms of media produced. It's not slowing down, you know, people are still consuming this at large, to the point where there are massive companies that are built just to make porn. You know, with this rise of isolation that I talked about previously, and also a rise of specifically men, because men consume a lot more porn than women do, statistically. There's sort of holes being pointed out. There's sort of glaring issues with porn that have been identified by people who consume a lot of it. Or even if you don't consume a lot, you can still, from an outsider's perspective, see what the issue is with watching two other people have sex with each other. You know, you can strap a GoPro onto the guy's head, but it doesn't make that connection. The porn being consumed is flawless. Not in a way that it's really good, in a way that there's not a human side to it. It's produced by a company with these sort of Hollywood-grade lighting systems. It's not real. You're not getting a real experience. You're still being deprived of a very crucial experience. So along comes Plato. He says that there's two forms of love. There's earthly, vulgar love, which is more primal. It's more, you know, I want to this woman. And there's pure love. It all ties into his whole world of forms, but Jesus Christ, we are not getting into the world of forms. So people may want just a quick fix, you know, they just want to see some people fuck. And, you know, that's fine or whatever. But eventually, you're gonna get bored. Or you just might not enjoy it as much as the pure love that people do strive for. You know, this is the most honored and perfect connection that you can have with another person that you just can't get through, you know, actors. Though we're still so isolated, we want to sort of stimulate that divine love. And how do we do it? Through community-based things. As we've evidenced, the way that we can sort of create happiness and create connection is through shared interests. You can sort of see where I'm going with all this. Shared interests inherently create connection between people. So to bridge that gap of isolation that people have with porn, they pivot it to something they already know. So people want their interests seen in porn. Much like men want busty Latina, big boobs. You know, they want their interests to be shown in the porn they consume. Not just because it's something they enjoy, but because these people are familiar. The world around them is understandable, and they sort of know these people on much more of a level than just a random porn actor. And from speaking to people who consume a lot of Rule 34 content, understanding the characters helps way more get them off than just, you know, seeing their tits. Another really good way of seeing this is through, like, AO3. Fan fiction, which is like 12 chapters long, and it's just developing on these characters to sort of fit them into a world narrative where they would have sex. People sit down and they read through it because it forms more connection than just watching porn. Films like 50 Shades of Grey had characters that people could understand, they could empathize, and they could sort of adapt to the world. So when they saw them fuck, it was way hotter for them. It's more comfortable. jacking off or having sex is quite a vulnerable position for people to be in. So to see familiar faces and characters, it's more comforting for a very isolated person to get off on. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this happens. One of them, psychological. There's this thing called the proximity principle, where if you spend so much time with a certain person, you eventually just, start becoming attracted to them. It's sort of how attraction works. But that's the principle. Subconsciously or consciously, you start building quite a strong bond between yourself and characters. Even if it's in a parasocial way, you create this bond which cannot really be undone because it's something you enjoy doing. Sort of think of it as like a soldier. You know why boats and guns are all called she? Like, oh, she's a beauty, or oh, me and her killed like 14 Iraqi children. It's because they spend so much time with this equipment that they may as well just be dating them. And the other one is more sociological. There's this guy called Giddens, and he comes up with this whole postmodern idea of confluent love, this sort of Disney-esque love that people are now searching for. Gone are the days where you'd be married for like 2 goats and some dead guy's gold. People are searching for that real connection and that childlike wonder that they get from another person. Though this is kind of unrealistic. This isn't a thing that the people can just sort of go out into the world and find their knight in shining armor. So people resort to the internet. These characters are often designed without fault, or if they are designed with fault, we can understand and see and empathize with their faults, therefore creating a very romanticized image of the character in the consumer's head. Therefore, when they make the connection, they have this confluent love that we are now craving as a postmodern society. One of the best ways that I can evidence the need of confluent love is through waifus. Reddit Discord mod hops on and he finds this girl that he's really attracted to. Happens to be from an anime, but that is like his waifu, This is a monogamous relationship that he's parasocially built with a cartoon character. Although, we may look at it and be like, hey, that's kind of weird. It is preventing isolation. So now we understand why it exists, which is sort of a building block for everything else. The whole point of Rule 34 is that if it exists, there's porn of it. This is the main bit that we've got to understand. Why is it so widespread? So understanding why it exists, we can see that by chance or sort of statistically, there's got to be at least one person in every single fandom that experiences this and then creates porn of these characters. Another reason why is if it's a very niche or humorous topic, sort of like the Brexit Rule 34 stuff that was made, it can draw a lot of attention to that artist. The Animal Crossing cat guy, the Egyptian cat, that blew up, and I think he's doing really well for himself now. A lot of artists do make this very out there and extreme, unthinkable Rule 34 content. Not because they get off on it, but because it drives traffic. But what I would argue is one of the primary reasons why it's so widespread is it's sort of a refuge for people. People who have been socially ostracized for their interests. They have an online community that sort of don't know their face, don't know their personality, their background, who will eat up the same weird shit that they've been socially ostracized for. Really good example, again, is the bronies. The whole brony movement it had a very sexual side to it, but it was sort of men who really liked My Little Pony. So much to the point where they even had their own word for masturbating. I think it was like clopping, where they would jack off to pony porn, and then they'd call it clopping. We look at this stuff and we're like, this is really weird, but they have a community who is also engaging in this stuff. It's sort of those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane, but they just couldn't hear the music. It's sort of like that level of stuff, where we look at it and we're like, oh, that's weird, but we don't get what they're getting. This is so getting demonetized, bro. I don't even have ads and it's getting demonetized. And this leads me on to the whole concept of the degeneracy threshold. Not a real concept, something my friend made up when we were drunk and talking about this, and also writing the script. The idea is that once you engage in some socially deemed weird shit, you sort of snowball. If it's fine for me to be into this, you know, people said that this was weird, but I'm into it, and there's people online who like it, then maybe it's not as weird to go into this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, and then eventually you get, you know, pyrocynical furry farts. I think I'm 95% sure that's how it happens. People sort of delve into this pipeline of degeneracy until they sit and they settle where they cannot go further. So I've sort of said my points, said why it's happening. Now we're gonna go on to what I think of it. What should you take away from your newfound understanding of Rule 34 content? Now, if you haven't been able to pick up throughout this whole thing, I don't personally engage in any of this stuff. I'm merely an onlooker who is observing it for the need of creating content for my YouTube channel. But from understanding, sort of gaining vertigen of these people, I don't think it's that weird. I mean, obviously there are weird aspects of it, but they are just people trying to get themselves off. I don't think you can control what you're really into, and I don't think it's my place to judge people on how sexually appealing their fantasies or their views on a specific character. I don't think that's up to me to make a judgment on them. So I guess this is sort of a lesson. Just let people be, man. Just, you know, unless they're making really weird, illegal child stuff, I know, not my place. And I think a lot of people should sort of look at these more degenerate areas of the internet with more of an open mind to sort of understand. I sort of had this revelation a couple of years ago, where if I was looking at something and I thought that was weird, obviously these people who are engaging in it have justified it within their own heads, and their justification is no more valid than my justification. If it's just interest and not causing harm, then there's no real reason to mock or look down upon these people, even if it is some really depraved shit. And I mean, like, what is really the worst that can happen from just letting these people do what they want to do? I mean, people would call me a degenerate. I'm wearing makeup, a choker, and a fucking dress. Society progresses, and eventually people may just start to accept that this is just something that people do. I mean, fuck, look at Overwatch, man. The whole Overwatch porn sphere is insanely big. There's a Wikipedia page on specifically Overwatch porn. It's not long until these things just come into the popular consensus and it's just accepted as a way of life. This sort of angry aggression and conservative view towards Rule 34 on the internet, it's just like a joke. I think it's very redundant. It's very reductionist. So yeah, that's it for the video. What can you take away? Love and positivity. As you can do with every single Unijoy video. I hope you enjoy. Maybe subscribe if you want. This is the first time doing a face video, and it's also the first time where I'm not doing a script. I don't know if you can keep seeing, but I just have like notes here. Like, that's why I've been kind of stumbly and not as well organized as possibly my previous videos. But as it progresses, I hope you follow along and you enjoy it, and I get better at speaking. I have been Unijoy, and you have been entertained.